Hi, I'm Adam Summer. You're listening to the Yerushalmi Talk podcast with the support of the Yeshivat Javar Yerushalayim in Har Nof, Jerusalem. This is Peah, chapter 6, Halacha 2. This one is really all about Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel. And in fact, it's going to look like they disagree, but actually they basically agree. So nice to see that Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel agree. There's one tiny point that they're going to disagree about. Now, the first part of the Gemara is going to be very unclear, and I'm going to read from you the version that the Vilna Gaon modified so that it fits his understanding of it. And then I'm going to explain to you the Rosh Cirillo, who preserves the original printed version, and explain the case of Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel according to the original unmodified printed version and how Rosh Cirillo understands that. Now, in the version that the Vilna Gaon modifies, it actually ends up being unresolved. It's unclear what is going on with it. So perhaps it shouldn't be modified, but nonetheless, I'm going to read the modified version. The Mishnah goes like this. If a sheaf was standing near a wall, or a stack of grain, or near cattle or farming tools, and he forgot to gather it, Bet Shammai says it is not shchicha, and it may be retrieved by the owner. Bet Hillel says it is shchicha, and it must be left to the poor. So let's unpack this. So the first part in the Mishnah where it says, if a sheaf was standing near a wall, so why the wall? And this is talking about gafa, which is a wall made of uncemented stones. That's the explanation by the Rosh for gafa. Sorry, it's not nafa. My eyesight's not so good. It's gafa. And this gafa is a wall made of uncemented stones, or it could be, in the Rambam's commentary on the Mishnah, he interprets gafa as some sort of gate. But we're talking about some sort of non-permanent wall. And the Mishnah continues and it says, if the sheaf was standing near a wall or a stack of grain or near cattle or farming tools, and he forgot to gather it. So it's something that's going to be non-permanent. And when it's talking about cattle's, it's saying bakar, which is like a cattle stall, says the Rosh Cirillo. Also, the Mara Fulda understands it that way. So it could even be a cattle stall. Those, by the way, can be movable. And we're talking about also implements for plowing. That's the Rambam's note on the Mishnah, where it's saying these tools. He's saying these are plowing tools. And the Rosh Cirillo is interpreting this farming tool not as a actual tool, but he's interpreting it as a shed where farming tools will be stored. That, by the way, is going to follow the understanding the Gemara of the Rosh Cirillo, as opposed to the Vilna Gaon who modifies the text. And it's saying, okay, and he forgot to gather. So we know that, well, I mean, from the Rosh's point, when the sheaves are being removed from the field to the threshing floor, the sheaf was located near one of the items mentioned in the Mishnah, and it was forgotten. So basically, they're saying, okay, one of these sorts of movable things, cattle are movable, or even if it's a physical shed, like a cattle stall, which can be movable, or a non-cemented wall, or a gate, or it could be a tool shed, or farming tools, depending if it's by the Rosh Cirillo or the Rambam. But it has this sense that it's not a permanent fixture, or it's not as built in as other more permanent structures would be. And that's a key point. So it says, Bet Shammai says, it is not shchicha and it may be retrieved by the owner. So what Bet Shammai is saying, he's saying that the sheaf that's located near any of these prominent items, they're prominent, that it's bound to be remembered eventually, and hence it does not become shchicha when overlooked. And by the way, that fits the Bet Shammai's opinion when you're taking a lot of piles of shchicha and you're putting them together, and perhaps you're taking 4 piles and collecting them together, and then you go off and you come back. He's saying that it's not shchicha because it's significant enough where you would eventually remember it, and because you could take away one at a time and it would add up to 4, which would constitute a row according to Bet Shammai, and that becomes significant enough where it wouldn't be forgotten, even if it was not yet brought to the final single collection point for all the shchicha before it's loaded for transport to the threshing floor. This is not the opinion of Bet Hillel, but he has this idea that if something is significant enough, then it will be eventually remembered and it can be collected. So the opinion by Bet Hillel, he's saying that it's not, or it is shchicha and it must be left to the poor. Bet Hillel is basically holding that a sheaf is not considered memorable just because it is located near one of these objects that we just talked about. And accordingly, it does become shchicha if it's forgotten. Now, let's take a look at the Shas Eliyahu, and let's look at the commentary by the Shas Eliyahu. He says here that a wall and a stack of grain are examples of landmarks that are stationary. Presumably, the grain was always stacked in the same place in the field. Cattle and farming tools, on the other hand, do not remain in one place. And accordingly, the Mishnah mentions a wall or a stack of grain to highlight Bet Hillel's view that even a sheaf situated near a fixed installation will not necessarily be remembered and is therefore shchicha. Cattle and tools are mentioned to emphasize, says the Shas Eliyahu, that in Bet Shammai's view, even these transient elements of the landscape constitute landmarks that will cause a sheaf left nearby to be remembered. So that's really the key here. In other words, are these movable products, these movable objects, are those going to constitute landmarks that's going to help him eventually remember these sheaves and that he's going to not have it be shchicha? Or the fact that they're movable is that they're not really, fixed installations, and it's not shchicha at all because, or it is shchicha because it's not significant enough where he would eventually remember it. In other words, the question is, what's going on with these non-permanent, quote-unquote, landmarks? What's going on with these things that are non-permanent? That's really the question. So the Gemara, as mentioned, we're going to read this first sugya, which, by the way, has no resolution to, according to how the Vilna Gaon modifies it. We're going to read it according to how the Vilna Gaon re-edits this, and we're going to explain why he edits this. So there's, just to start off about this, before we get, and later we'll get into the Rosh Cirillo's version, which is unedited, and explain what he means. Basically, I want to explain this before I start, because it's a little bit complicated. In the normal printed version of the Yerushalmi for this sugya, the difficulty with Bet Shammai's view is from the case of a sheaf that's near a wall or a grain stack, and the difficulty with Bet Hillel's view is a case of a sheaf that's near cattle and farming tools. And the Gemara that's coming up is going to appear to be explaining that only a sheaf that's located near an item that is relatively non-distinct, like cattle, should be exempted from shkikaka, and many commentators are going to find this problematic because the logic would dictate that the items of greater distinctiveness are the ones that should be more likely to affect an exemption. So this is why they're going to come and amend this text so that the two questions are basically transposed. And that's basically the version of the Vilna Gaon, how we're going to read it now. So basically, we have these four cases. You have the standing wall, you have the stack of grain, cattle, and the farming tools. And according to Bet Shammai, it's a problem for two of them, but not the other two. And according to Bet Hillel, it's a problem for two of them, but not the other two. Okay, so both Bet Shammai and both Bet Hillel have a problem with the other of these four. Two out of these four, both of them have a problem with. That's what they're trying to say. Of the four cases discussed in the Mishnah, the first two, the wall or the grain stack, are stationary landmarks, while the other two, the cattle and the farming tools, are transient in nature. In other words, they're movable. Okay. Now, in light of this difference, the Gemara is going to find a difficulty with the position of both Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel. Here's how the Vilna Gaon remodifies it. Sugya is modified to say, but there is the following difficulty with Bet Hillel's position. Regarding the case of a sheaf forgotten near a wall or a stack of grain, the wall and stack of grain are items that are distinctive. In other words, it's a fixed position in the field, so that the nearby sheaf stands to eventually be remembered. Yet Bet Hillel says that the sheaf is shchichacha. That's the question. How can it be shchichacha? In other words, if these sheaves, in other words, are near the wall or a stack of grain, okay, and these items, the wall and the stack of grain, are fixed, and you're saying, okay, well, these will eventually cause you to be remembered. So how could it be that he's saying, that Bet Hillel is saying that this can become shchichacha? Because you'd say, well, it's by that wall over there, I remember it. So why is that going to be shchichacha? That's the question, and it's posed as a question. And conversely, there's a following difficulty with Bet Shammai's position. And it reads, regarding the case of a sheaf that's forgotten near cattle or farming tools, the cattle and tools are items that are relatively non-distinct because they're portable. Yet Bet Shammai says that the sheaf is not shchichacha, and the difficulty remains unresolved. So, according to Bet Shammai, they're saying, wait a second, you're leaving this over here and you're putting this by cattle. All the cattle look the same, they move around, and you're putting next to some farming tools, and these move around all the time. Workers are coming and taking these tools and using them all the time, and you're saying that the owner, that's distinctive enough where the owner is not going to have it be shchichacha at all. I mean, these tools might not even be there. They might be moved over, 10 minutes later into the field. It's not a permanent fixture. And they're saying, according to Bet Shammai, that this is going to be not shchichacha. They can understand, okay, Mr. Bet Shammai, I understand that you're putting these next to a field. I'm sorry, you're putting it next to a stack of grain, and you're putting it next to a wall. Okay, I can understand where you'd say it's not shchichacha, but how about next to cattle? Those cattle are moving around all the time, so how can that be? So it's unresolved. Let me explain it by the Rosh Cirillo, who does not modify the text at all, and let me explain it through that way. Okay, Rosh Cirillo, he preserves the printed version by interpreting the Mishnah's later two cases as referring to a cattle stall and tool shed. Okay, so according to Rosh Cirillo, okay, he's saying, and he's writing it into this Gemara, that when it's saying cattle, it's not heads of cattle, that it's a cattle shed, or tool shed. These, by the way, can be movable, but they're semi-permanent structures, and that these are going to be. This is how the original text is looking at it and interpreting it. Says the Rosh Hashanah that it's really meaning that it's it should be interpreted. The Mishnah should be interpreted, and this Gemara should be interpreted as talking about a cattle stall and a tool shed. And these are permanently useful structures or semi-permanent. When you have like chicken coops, those tend to be movable because you want to move them from pasture to pasture because it's good for the farm, it's good for the pasture, it's good for the field, and a lot of these are built to be movable. And a lot of times, a lot of these tool sheds can also be movable. They're not fixed, heavy, permanent structures like a house or a barn. So we're talking about these things. This is how the Rosh Hashanah is interpreting it, and these are semi-permanently useful structures, certainly more permanent than an uncemented stone wall or a stack of grain, says the Rosh Hashanah, and are thereby considered to be fully distinctive items that can exempt a nearby sheaf of shkichucha. In other words, if you're interpreting it that way, and you're reading the Gemara this way, and you're reading the Mishnah this way, then it can exempt it, and it would be like Bet Shammai in that case, which is very unusual, because they would say that these are okay, semi-permanent, but they're still permanent enough, and so then it's really an argument of Bet Shammai saying, okay, they're not exactly fixed structures, but they're distinctive enough, and it's going to be not shkikuga because while these are semi-permanent structures, that it's distinctive enough. And in that reading, Bet Hillel is basically going to be saying it is shkikuga because it's not permanent, it's not a heavy fixed structure, and it's not distinctive enough because it could be moved as well. And that again, it's written as gafa, which is an uncemented wall. In other words, the Mishnah Bet Hillel would basically be saying that all of these things are semi-permanent and therefore not distinctive enough, and therefore it'd be shkikaka. But the point by Bet Hillel would be that if it were next to a permanent structure, then it would be shkikaka. It would not be shkikaka. Bet Shammai would say the same thing about a permanent being next to a permanent distinctive structure that you'll eventually remember it. But the difference here is with Bet Shammai saying that no, a semi-permanent structure would be enough, that it would not be shkikucha. That would be the way to interpret the original text without the modification by the Vilna Gaon, and that's how the Rosh Hashanah is reading it. By the way, just to point out, it's interesting because the Rambam is the one who's pointing out that it could also be some sort of gate, or that this could also be an uncemented stone wall. So it also, according to the Rambam, has this this way to read it. Although it's the question is, on the others, would the Rambam also be interpreting as a shed? In terms of the tools, he's interpreting it as tools for plowing, not necessarily a shed where farming tools are stored, which is the Rosh Hashanah's explanation and interpretation on the Mishnah and the Gemara, so that it actually would be resolvable and you could have the text stand as it is without modification. So in chapter 7 in Peah, in the first Halacha, it's going to talk about a law, the Mishnah, that's going to talk about if somebody overlooks an olive tree that is memorable on account of its name, because it's a famous olive tree, or it's extremely productive, or it's a specific location. the law of shchicha does not apply because the tree will eventually have it be remembered. And the Gemara is going to now analyze that this is given in that Mishnah in the case of olive trees that are distinctive on account of the location. Now, really the question is going to be, are these other things, like location of something that has a sheaf that's next to it, going to be significant enough to save the shchicha from becoming forgotten? In other words, will it eventually be remembered, and that eventual remembering cause it to not be shchicha? That's what it's going to be asking. Gemara reads like this, and we're not reading any modified versions now. This is back to the regular version. But just to note that the way this is read in the modified version of the Vilna Gaon, these difficulties are unresolved. Okay. Being distinctive in its location means that it stands alongside the wine press or the break of a wall. Now, a tree is known as the tree, if a tree is known as the tree near the wine press. Or if it's like, oh, that tree over there near the gap. So if something were left next to something that's in a famous location that you remember it because there's a landmark next to it, then that shchicha is eventually going to be remembered sooner or later, and that's the point. Okay, that's the point. So that's what it's trying to say, that this in its location means, being distinctive in its location, the Gemara reads, that it stands alongside this wine press or break of wall. And the Gemara asks, seemingly that Mishnah in chapter 7, Halacha 1, is in accordance with the opinion of Beit Shammai. It looks like it's in Beit Shammai's opinion. Because Beit Shammai says the Gemara, in the Mishnah here, that a sheaf which is forgotten near a landmark is not subject to the law of shchicha. And this is echoed by the Mishnah below, which teaches that there is an exemption of distinctive location with regards to olive trees as well. But Bet Hillel states here that a sheaf located near a landmark is subject to the law of shchicha. And this view is going to be totally incompatible with the Mishnah's ruling that an olive tree that stands next to a wine press or breaking a wall is not going to be subject to shchicha. That's really the question. In other words, as a rule, the halacha we know is going to follow Bet Hillel over Bet Shammai. Okay, that we know. But the Gemara is going to find it difficult that this Mishnah should present an anonymous ruling that looks like it's the view of Bet Shammai. And we know that anonymous rules are generally authoritative. So what's going on that, if you have over there in chapter 7, the Mishnah's ruling that, an olive tree that stands next to a wine press or breaking a wall is not subject to shchicha. What about over here? So another way to interpret Rosh Cirillo's point is, let's say you're saying that these four things, okay, that this uncemented wall, the stack of grain, a cattle shed, okay, and the farming tools, not farming tools, let's say it's a farming tool shed, okay, and let's say that these are all non-permanent structures or semi-permanent structures, and we're going to interpret it this other way, where we're saying that, well, these are really, you could say that they're permanent enough that you would remember the location. You'd say, oh, it's over by that wall. Yeah, okay, the wall is not exactly permanent, it's uncemented, right? But it makes a landmark. And that could be the way to interpret this Gemara, whether it's modified or not. They could be asking about landmark. In other words, are these things, whether they're permanent or not, whether they're semi-permanent or not, is that going to constitute a landmark that's effectively going to grab this shchicha, make sure that it is or is not shchicha, that it'll eventually be remembered? That's another way to read this and interpret it. The Gemara is going to differentiate between the ruling of the Mishnah and the ruling of this Mishnah now, the Mishnah in chapter 7 and this Mishnah now. And here's what Rabbi Yossi says. And here's what's so great about the sages, is that, in fact, there's no disagreement. Rabbi Yossi says, actually, that Mishnah is consistent with the opinion of all. In other words, Rabbi Yossi himself says that it accords even with Bet Hillel, who rules in our Mishnah that a sheaf located near a landmark, again, we're talking about landmarks, remains subject to shchicha. So the Mishnah over there in chapter 7 is discussing the case of, and here's what the Gemara says they're discussing a case of an item, says the Sugya, that is permanently attached to the ground, like an olive tree standing alongside an item that is attached to the ground, like a wine press. And Bet Hillel agrees that a fixed object located near another fixed object is considered distinctive and is thus exempt from the law of shchicha. The Mishnah here, however, speaks of an item that is detached, like a sheaf of grain. Sheaf of grain is detached, standing alongside an item that is attached, like a wall. And regarding this case, Bet Hillel maintains that the sheaf, being portable, cannot be regarded as distinctive on account of its location and is thereby subject to the law of shchicha. So let's take a look at the Pnei Moshe for some help to get the deeper point of Bet Hillel. And here's what Pnei Moshe explains. Pnei Moshe explains that Rabbi Yossi asserts that Bet Hillel admits that an attached item is rendered memorable and thus exempt from shchicha on account of its location near a fixed landmark, as in the case of the Mishnah below regarding an olive tree next to a wine press. My own point is that, hey, the olive tree is rooted into the ground, and that wine press is cemented and fixed into the ground to make the wine. These are two permanent structures next to each other. Okay, this is not a case of an uncemented wall or like something like a chicken coop that is movable, so you can move it from pasture to pasture, or a tool shed that you can it's light enough and semi permanent that you can move it somewhere else. It's not such a fixed structure like a wine vat that you're going to be making wine out of. So, according to here, says the Pnei Moshe, that on account of the location near a fixed landmark, as in the case of the Mishnah, regarding an olive press near a wine press, Bet Hillel argues with Bet Shammai only in the case of an item that is not attached to the ground, because they maintain that since an item can easily be transported at a moment's notice, its location near a landmark does nothing to fix it in a person's mind. And that is why, says the Pnei Moshe, Bet Hillel rules in this Mishnah that a sheaf of grain is subject to the law of shchicha even when it is located next to a wall. But keep in mind, it's not just a wall. This is an uncemented wall. So all the more so in other cases of the Mishnah where the unattached sheaf lies near another portable entity, such as a herd of cattle, or even a cattle shed that could be moved around to go from pasture to pasture. They have such a thing, and I've seen them before. That you have these things so that you can pick them up and keep the animals relatively safe from predators, and you can move the animals from pasture to pasture so that you can keep these things grazing. And these, they have a version that is a permanent structure, but they also have these cattle sheds that are actually movable and not permanent. So if it's that case where it's not permanent, says Bet Hillel, it's not going to be distinctive enough. That these semi-permanent structures are not distinctive enough to cause it to be remembered. That's the point. So let's take a look at the next part. Okay, so in this Mishnah, it's teaching that Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel actually are arguing about the case of a sheaf that's located near a wall, a grain stack, either cattle shed or actual cattle, or farming tools. Maybe farming tools that are for plowing, or if you're going to read it like the Rosh Cirillo, that it's a tool shed. Okay, and in the Mishnah over there in chapter 7, or in the following Mishnah, the next Mishnah, sorry, in chapter 6, Halacha 3, this next Mishnah, right now we're on Halacha 2, the next Mishnah we're going to learn that Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel agrees that there is no shchicha in a case where one took hold of a sheep with the intent to take it to the city, and then he subsequently forgot it in the field. Okay, on that there's no dispute. The Gemara is now citing a brisa that presents a Tanaic dispute as to which of these two cases was actually disputed by Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel. So now we're going to get into this Tanaic dispute, and we're going to try to get a deeper understanding of it. Now, I want to take a look at the Ramban's commentary in Bavli Baba Metzia 11a. Okay, that's a parallel for this, and his explanation is like this. Okay, of what's coming up. It says, in this case, the farmer who was in the process of removing sheaves from the harvest area to the threshing floor took hold of a sheaf with the intent to take it home to the city and temporarily placed it on the side. Now, if he subsequently forgets to take the sheaf home with him, it is not rendered shchicha because he did in fact remember to take it at the time of gathering. In other words, remember that once it's at the time of gathering where you have this big harvest pile, okay, and even if you bring it all to the threshing floor, so that now has passed the time of gathering where all the sheaves are gathered to the central pile and transported. If it's after that transportation part where it's leaving the field, now it's not shchicha anymore, and everybody agrees with that, okay? So that's the note by the Ramban to help us to understand this. The Gemara reads like this. These are Tanaim that are going to be arguing about this, and we'll get into it. Rabbi Eli says, I asked Rabbi Yeshua with respect to which sheaves do Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel argue about. In other words, they're trying to figure out, was there disagreement about the case of a sheaf that's located near a wall or a grain stack, as recorded in this Mishnah, or about the case of a sheaf that the owner took hold of to the city and then he forgot it in the field. What are they arguing about? Here's what Rabbi Yeshua says. Rabbi Yeshua said, he said to me, I swear by this Torah that their dispute was as follows. Okay, so this is a pretty clear thing that Rabbi Yeshua is swearing on the Torah that this is what it is. He must have this as a tradition in order to know this, okay, that this really must be what's going on. And so let me read it to you. Here's what the Gemara says, that Rabbi Yeshua says this is what this argument is. It says like this. It says, if a sheaf was standing near a wall or a stack of grain or near cattle or farming tools, and he forgot to gather it, Bet Shammai says it is not shchicha, but Bet Hillel says it is shchicha. However, says the Gemara, when I came before Rabbi Eliezer, the great Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Eli, he was a student of Rabbi Eliezer, by the way, and here's what it said. Okay, when I came before Rabbi Eliezer, okay, this is Rabbi Eli saying, this is Rabbi Yeshua saying to Rabbi Eli, he said to me, Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel did not disagree regarding a sheaf that was standing near a wall or a stack of grain or near cattle or farming tools and he forgot it. That is shchicha. Regarding what did they disagree? Regarding a sheaf that one took from the field with the intent to bring it home to the city. So the Pnei Moshe here says that Bet Shammai also agrees that the sheaf being only temporarily located next to a landmark will not be remembered by the owner on account of its location. In other words, really what Rabbi Eliezer is saying is they're saying that Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai agree, that they agree. But they're not talking about any sheaf. That's what this is talking about. They're saying that what sheaf are they talking about? They're talking about the sheaf that comes up in the next Mishnah in chapter 6, Halacha 3. By the way, we're on Halacha 2. But what are they arguing about? They're arguing that guy takes up, after the time of gathering, takes up a sheaf, says, okay, I'm going to bring it to the city. And now this is the sheaf that he forgot next to one of these four landmarks. This is not just any sheaf. In the tradition, this is this particular sheaf. Why is that important? Because it's a question about when is this time of gathering going to constitute a finality of when forgotten sheaves are no longer forgotten sheaves. That's really the key point, says Rabbi Eliezer. Now, we didn't know this by just reading this Mishnah. We didn't know this. What are you talking about? You're talking about, in this case, that there's a specific type of sheaf, and that's what they're arguing about? That they're really not arguing, says Rabbi Yossi, says Rabbi Eli, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Eliezer. They're all saying, these Tanaim are actually saying there's no argument here. That they're actually talking about it, and they all agree there's no argument, that they're only talking about this particular kind of sheaf that was forgotten. Okay, and that's why you can't come along and you can't poskin according to the Mishnah. Okay, it's very dangerous to do that. You're not allowed to go poskin to the Mishnah. That's why all the Mishnayot, you have to look at what their tradition is. Okay, it looks like it can be saying one thing and it means something else. And without this tradition, okay, you don't have a way to unpack this. And it's so important to study Gemara and use it as a tool to try to understand what is the Mishnah talking about. When they wrote this, when Rebbe wrote down and recording the Mishnah, he knew that there was no disagreement between Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai on these even 4 semi-permanent structures or permanent structures or anything like it. It's distinctive enough that it's not going to be shchicha. What are they arguing about? If this particular kind of sheaf that you already took after the time of gathering, and then you say, okay, I'm going to bring this to the city, and then you went over to one of these 4 things, you put it down. The question is that kind of sheaf going to be shchicha or not? That's what the disagreement is. But if you took any kind of thing and you put it there, then there's actually no disagreement at all. That's why it's so important that you can't just look at the Mishnah and poskin off the Mishnah and say, oh, this is what the Mishnah means. A lot of times there's all these traditions that are running underneath it, and the Mishnah is not like what you think it is. Okay? The Mishnah is always right, but a lot of times it takes explaining to understand it. So Rabbi Eliezer says, he said to me, so when Rabbi Yeshua came over to Rabbi Eliezer to ask him, Rabbi Eliezer said, he said to me, Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel do not disagree regarding a sheaf that was standing near a wall or a stack of grain or near cattle or farming tools and he forgot it. That is shchicha. So Bet Shammai is also agreeing that a sheaf, even being only temporarily located next to that landmark, will not be remembered by the owner on account of its location. So regarding what did they disagree, says Rabbi Eliezer, says regarding a sheaf that one took from the field with the intent to bring it home to the city. Okay, he's going to transport it back to the city. And says the Gemara, temporarily place it alongside a wall, alongside a grain stack, alongside cattle, or farming tools, or the semi-permanent shed, okay, and then forgot it. For Bet Shammai says in the Gemara that the sheaf is not shchicha in this case because he had already acquired it before it was forgotten. But Bet Hillel says that it is shchicha in this case. In other words, in Rabbi Eliezer's view, all right, he's saying that Bet Hillel maintains that the fact that one initially took hold of a sheaf with the intent of removing it to the city, it does not prevent it from becoming shchicha if he later forgets to take it from the field. Rabbi Eliezer is mentioning that the sheaf was placed alongside a wall or one of these other 3 things to teach that even in this case, where the 2 possible reasons for the sheaf to be exempt, Bet Hillel nevertheless rules that the sheaf is subject to shchicha. So that's a very key point. So Bet Shammai in the Gemara says that the sheaf is not shchicha in this case because he had already acquired it when it was forgotten, and Bet Hillel says it is shchicha. Gemara continues, says something amazing. Says like this, says, and when I came and related the words of Rabbi Eliezer before Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was this famous guy who became the head of the academy for a short period of time. He said to me, I swear by the covenant. In other words, he's saying by the Torah, which is the covenant between God and the nation of Israel, which, by the way, is mentioned in Exodus 34:27. He's saying that according to these words of the Torah, I've sealed a covenant with you, Israel. He's basically coming and saying, with these same words, okay, I swear by the covenant, says Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, these are the very words that were said to Moses at Horeb on Mount Sinai. Okay, he's saying that indeed the true version of the dispute between Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai is just like what Rabbi Eliezer said, and the case is gonna now talk about a totally different topic. Okay, also Bet Hillel, Bet Shammai, but it's going to get into something else, another topic. Okay, Gemara cites a discussion regarding a Mishnah and Tractate Ketubot, in the course of which our Mishnah's ruling will be introduced as a challenge. Okay, so we learned over there in the Mishnah and Ketubot in chapter 8, Halacha 1, and this is a Mishnah that's dealing with the extent of a woman's ability to sell her melog properly. Melog property. We learn in the Mishnah there, if a woman inherited properties before becoming an arusa, and then she became an arusa, Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel agree that she may sell them or give them away, and the transfer stands. If, however, she inherited the properties after becoming an arusa, she is still an arusa, but Bet Shammai says she may sell them, and Bet Hillel says she may not sell them. Okay, so Rosh Cirillo says like this, okay? Rosh Cirillo says that Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai disagree about whether an arusa is allowed to sell property that she inherited after becoming an arusa, okay? And that they are in agreement that an arusa may sell or give away property that she inherited before becoming an arusa. There's no disagreement. Okay, basically, since she acquired the property while she was single and she's under her own jurisdiction, her husband does not obtain rights to it. So even after she enters his jurisdiction through becoming an arusa, okay, that everybody's in agreement, okay, that she was single and she was of clean mind and no problem to inherit something, and she was aware of everything and no problem. Okay, the case is going to come where after she inherits something. That's the point. Okay, Rosh Cirillo says from this point though, before Nisuin, the husband has not yet actually acquired the rights that are accorded to him through marriage. Okay, that's the point. Okay, and Pnei Moshe says like this. Pnei Moshe says Bet Hillel holds that since the woman acquired the property at a point in time when the husband has prospective rights to her and her property for an arusa stands to be taken in nisuin, it is therefore forbidden for her to sell the property. In other words, there's like a lien on it. Okay, that he's engaged with her, and it's basically part of the property that will be coming into the marriage. You can't get rid of it. That's basically what it's saying. So the Gemara is going to ask a question regarding this dispute presented in the Mishnah over there, and it's going to relate to over here. Okay? So Rabbi Pinchas asks in the presence of Rabbi Yossi, why in this dispute, in other words, this dispute of it, whether it's before Nisuin or after, was it not taught among the leniencies of Bet Shammai and the stringencies of Bet Hillel? Keep in mind, he's asking, in Masechet Idios, Masechet Idios is a whole Masechet having to deal with the disputes between Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai, where um, where where Bet Shammai is lenient in all cases and in all ways to look at it, and Bet Hillel is stringent in all cases to look at it. A lot of times you'll see something where, uh, um, you know, it'll look like Bet Shammai is lenient, but if you look at it in certain other cases, it'll actually be strict. Okay, and a lot of times uh, Bet Hillel, who's usually lenient, okay, it'll come with a strictness, but sometimes if you look at it and interpret it in another way, or you look at it in this case with a different set of circumstances, it'll be stringent. Okay, the tractate Masechet Idios is special because it's only dealing with the leniencies of Bet Shammai, where in every way to look at it, in every case, in every possibility, those cases are lenient. And in every case, every way to look at it, with Bet Hillel, they're stringent. Okay, so that there's no mix. Okay, that sometimes this case of it being a mix, that they wouldn't put it in idios. Okay, because that's not so interesting. What is interesting is where in all possibilities, Bet Shammai is lenient and Bet Hillel is strict. And Rabbi Pinchas is asking to Rabbi Yossi, why isn't this put in there? So the Gemara is going to answer. Rabbi Yossi replied to him, the Mishnah in Idios cites only those matters which, in Bet Hillel's view, are stringent from all perspectives, and in Bet Shammai's view, says the Gemara, are lenient in all perspectives. Here, however, each of the rulings is a stringency from one perspective and a leniency from another perspective. So the Marafuld is pointing out that in this case, okay, we're dealing with a dispute about monetary law, and the position in the dispute generally is not described as being lenient or stringent, because a leniency for one party is going to be a stringency for another party. Okay, and the Marafulda continues the explanation. He says, Bet Shammai's ruling that an Arusa may sell her inherited property is a leniency from the Arusa's perspective, but a stringency from the husband's perspective. And Bet Hillel's ruling that the property may not be sold is a stringency from the Arusa's perspective, but a leniency from the husband's perspective. So this is why this is not going to be brought into the book, the Masechet of Idios. So that's a good point. So this is the last part, and then we'll finish up for the day. So Rabbi Pinchas is going to challenge this response. And he says like this. He says, but we learned in the Mishnah in Idios, in chapter 4, Halacha 3, among the leniencies of Bet Shammai and the stringencies of Bet Hillel, Bet Shammai says, produce that was declared ownerless for the poor is in fact deemed ownerless. But Bet Hillel says it is not deemed ownerless even for the poor, unless it is declared ownerless for the rich as well. Now, says the Gemara, Bet Shammai's ruling in this case is a leniency for the poor, who now have gained right to acquire the produce, and a stringency for the original owner, who has lost his ownership of the produce. Gemara continues, says, yet the Mishnah teaches that it's a leniency for Bet Shammai. And Rabbi Yossi is going to deflect this challenge. Bet Shammai's ruling, says Rabbi Yossi, that there is a leniency for the poor, but it is not a stringency for the owner, because the produce was initially declared ownerless by the owner's own will. So here's what the Pnei Moshe says about this. He's saying, since the owner himself chose to declare the produce hefker, Bet Shammai's ruling that the declaration is effective does not reflect a loss or imposition on the part of the owner. Accordingly, the ruling cannot be classified as a stringency in any case. So, in contrast, says the Rosh Cirillo, in the case of the Mishnah and Ketubot, Bet Shammai allows the Arusa to sell inherited property against her husband's will, which does constitute a stringency from the husband's point of view. So Rabbi Pinchas is going to be unhappy with that, and he's going to put another challenge to Rabbi Yossi that the Mishnah in Idios records only those disputes in which the position of Bet Shammai is lenient from all positions. So the Gemara reads, Rabbi Pinchas said to him, but we learned further in the Masechet in Idios, chapter 4, Halacha 4, if a sheaf was standing near a wall or a stack of grain or near cattle or farming tools, he forgot to gather it. Bet Shammai says it is not shchicha and may be retrieved by the owner. But Bet Hillel says it is shchicha, must be left to the poor. So basically bringing up this exact Mishnah. Okay, that this Mishnah is in the book of Idios. Very interesting. So here's what the Gemara continues. It says, now, Bet Shammai's ruling, says Rabbi Pinchas, in this case is a leniency for the owner as it permits him to retrieve the forgotten sheaf, and a stringency for the poor as it forbids him to take the sheaf. Yet the Mishnah teaches it as a leniency of Bet Shammai. That's a very good question. So he's basically saying that according to Bet Shammai's ruling, this is a leniency for the owner, and it's a stringency for the poor. And Rabbi Yossi is going to deflect this challenge. How? How is he going to deflect that challenge? Seems like a really good point. Here's how Rabbi Yossi handles it. Rabbi Yossi replies to him, Bet Shammai's ruling over here or over there in Idios is a leniency for the owner, but it is not a stringency for the poor, since the poor have not yet acquired any interest in the forgotten sheaf. Only the removal of property that is already under one's jurisdiction is considered a stringency. In other words, says the Pnei Moshe, that because it's not under one's jurisdiction, it's not considered a stringency. It hasn't been acquired. So how can that be a stringency? The poor didn't acquire it. That's not stringent to the poor. There's no acquisition there. Rabbi Pinchas isn't happy with that, and he's going to challenge it again. Here's what Rabbi Pinchas says. Gemara says, but if so, how did you answer above that Bet Shammai's permitting of an arusa to sell the property that she inherited as an arusa is considered a stringency for the husband? Say here as well, says Rabbi Pinchas, that Bet Shammai's ruling is a leniency for the wife and not a stringency for the husband, since she has not yet acquired an actual interest in the properties that she inherited. So keep in mind here that one of the deeper parts of this Gemara and understanding this Mishnah is that it might not just be the type of sheaf that is over here, but one of the key mechanisms is when is this going to be effectively acquired? In other words, when does this fall into the category of becoming part of the class of property belonging to the poor at large, not specifically a poor person like, oh, this particular poor person, but the class of property that goes to all people, right? When does it become acquired by that? Why does it become acquired by them? That's really the deeper point here. In other words, that if you're looking at it like what Rabbi Yossi just said, is that, hey, there's no stringency because it didn't get acquired by them. So they didn't lose anything. There's not stringent on the poor. There's no acquisition. That's a deep point here. So if there's no acquisition, it's not a stringency. Okay, that's what the Rabbi Yossi is arguing. And Rabbi Yossi is going to answer this. And here's how the Gemara answers it. Rabbi Yossi replied, since he has already betrothed her, the properties are deemed to have fallen into both her jurisdiction and his jurisdiction. So the Pnei Moshe is saying that since, hence in Bet Shammai's ruling that the Arusa may sell the property, that's indeed a stringency with respect to the husband. So that's why it would not be in idios, because it's lenient for the wife and it's strict for the husband, and there's a claim on it now. Now there's a claim. In the case of what Rabbi Yossi's pointing about with the sheaf, is that this sheaf hasn't yet become shchicha. It doesn't fall into the property of the poor people yet. And in this case, both the the man and the woman here, in the case of the Arusa, now they have, since he's already betrothed her, he has a claim on the property, even though he can't use the property yet. He has a claim on it. So that's why. Okay. So now we were talking about the views of Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel on the Arusa's ability to sell the property that she inherited after she became an Arusa. And the Gemara is going to cite a Baraisa that elaborates the case, and then we're finished. Okay. Rabbi Yudah said, the sages argued before Rabban Gamliel, since an Arusa is his wife and a Nesua is his wife, just as this one's, the Nesua's sale is invalid, so should this one, the Arusa's sale, be invalid. And Rabban Gamliel replied to them, says the Gemara, concerning the new properties that she inherited after becoming a Nesua, we are ashamed. We do not understand why the sale is invalid. Okay? And you wish to impose upon us the old properties, in other words, to limit her ability to sell the properties that she inherited as an Arusa. So let's take a look at the Shita Mekubetzes commentary in Ketubos 78a, because that's a parallel text, and it's going to explain this like this. Okay, Rabban Gamliel in the Shita Mekubetzes commentary on Ketubos 78a Bavli is responding as follows: it is difficult to understand that a Nesua, that why the rabbi stated that when a wife sells property that she inherited as a Nesua, her husband may remove the property from the buyer in order to enjoy the produce. Because the husband is entitled only to the produce of the wife's property, but the property itself is hers, and the sale ought to be fully valid. And the husband should be forced to take his property from the money she obtains from the sale, in other words, by investing it and keeping the profits. So will you now come along and compound this difficulty by invalidating even the sale of the property that she inherited and sold as an Arusa? That's the note by the Shita Mekubetzes. So the Gemara is going to clarify, what does Rabban Gamliel mean? And here's what it is, and then we're finished. Okay? So which are the new properties to which Rabban Gamliel is referring? Gemara says those that she inherited and sold after she became a Nesua. And which are the old properties to which Rabban Gamliel is referring? Those that she inherited and sold before she became a Nesua as an Arusa, and subsequently became a Nesua. In other words, that the sale of property by an Arusa has relevance to the husband only after Nesuin has taken place. It is from this this after Nesuin standpoint, that the Gemara is referring to the properties which the wife acquired and sold as old properties. But going back here, okay, this is a deeper way to understand why Bet Shammai's opinion and Bet Hillel's opinion is not an idios, why it's not lenient and strict in all circumstances. Okay, and the key point here to understanding why it's not is that there has to be an acquisition that takes place of the sheaf. And the key point is that the forgetting of the sheaf, the real forgetting of the sheaf, where everybody agrees this is forgotten, okay, that this constitutes an acquisition by the general class of poor people, and going into their general class of property, okay? And that's the point, okay? The point is that it has to be acquired, and the forgetting does become a real acquisition. And in those cases, it wasn't yet forgotten in some of those circumstances, and that's why it is not a stringency, okay? Because it wasn't acquired. Thank you so much.